A lot of people like myself make a lot of claims about Tolkien, that he was a medievalist, a traditionalist, a devout Catholic or environmentalist, and so on. Some have even called him a feminist, while others a misogynist, a defender of equality, or a racist. Most people justify these things, usually by citing specific sources, while others don't even do that. In any case, how are you to know that what is being told to you is true? Even if a source is cited, how do you know the context has been correctly interpreted, that nothing has been left out that could manipulate the information? Through this channel, I've gained a lot of experience on this, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be better equipped to not only do your own research, but also recognize misinformation on J.R.R. Tolkien. Like with all historical research, it is important to recognize whether a source is primary or secondary. In studying Tolkien and especially his views, I have thankfully found that primary sources are usually the most common, and therefore the most accurate. This, however, still has its caveats. For example, the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien is a collection of personal letters written by the professor himself and compiled and edited by his biographer, Humphrey Carpenter. While doing research with this book, it is important to keep in mind certain things. For starters, Tolkien was not writing a personal meditation or diary like Marcus Aurelius. What we are reading are personal correspondences that were likewise never meant to be published, but also directed at either friends, family, business associates, or fans. As you know from your own personal life, the person you're communicating with is often a very important variable that dictates not only the content of your words, but also the way in which you convey them. Corresponding with people we know from the historical record, who were particularly close friends or family members, makes reasonable the assumption that Tolkien, like anyone in his position, would be honest and truly speak his mind. And in fact, it is in those letters in particular that we see some of what certain people may call Tolkien's more extreme, or at least noteworthy opinions. It is in letters to his son Christopher and Michael, for example, that he talks the most about his faith, the importance of the sacraments, what it means to lead a Christian life, and how to treat women. Or to a close friend like Robert Murray, that he refers to the Lord of the Rings as fundamentally Catholic. It is to his son Michael that he calls Hitler a ruddy little ignoramus in letter 45, and to his son Christopher in letter 53 that he calls Stalin a murderer, but simultaneously criticizes the spread of American culture and globalization. In the very same letter, he also voices his dislike of the British Commonwealth and Great Britain as an entity, and also says that the world might not be so much better, regardless of who wins between the Germans and the Allies. There are countless more examples of this, and it is no surprise that these letters were always directed to people very close to him, which can help us build a consistent view of his honest opinions. To take this a step further, it is also to his son Christopher in letter 83 that he voices his support for Francisco Franco in reference to C.S. Lewis's opposition to him. Within the letter, though, we can see that his opinions were fundamentally influenced by the Catholicism of Franco's regime, in contrast to the Spanish communists and anarchists, than of any real support of the actual political organization of the Franco establishment. We know this because elsewhere in his letters, Tolkien outlines his personal opinions on political organization, such as in letter 52, again to Christopher, which points to localism and limitations on government. At this point, you get the idea. The letters are useful, and especially so when you can understand their context. It is actually through most of the letters that I've mentioned so far, such as 43 and 53, that you can tell Tolkien wasn't a feminist, for example, regardless of anyone's interpretation of Eowyn's heroic deeds as an expression of feminism. A great example where primary sources and popular opinions clash is the matter of Tolkien's views on race. In yet another personal letter to Christopher, numbered 61, which as we've established are usually the most transparent, Tolkien goes on to voice his horror at the treatment of black people in South Africa. and even in his 1959 farewell address at Oxford, he goes on to denounce segregation. In fact, if you read his letters, these views are quite consistent, with the professor even criticizing British imperialism in Asia in letter 100 sent to Christopher yet again. But there are still interpretations that the orcs, for example, were inspired by racist beliefs, with many even citing letter 210, in which Tolkien explicitly mentions European stereotypes of Asian people to help Forrest J. Ackerman better understand why Morton Zimmerman's manuscript of a potential Lord of the Rings movie was wrong. When I say he mentions European stereotypes, I mean quite literally, as in he frames what he says as something certain people from the European perspective may believe, as opposed to himself. Why does Z put beaks and feathers on orcs? The orcs are definitely stated to be corruptions of the human form seen in elves and men. They are, or were, squat, broad, flat-nosed, sallow-skinned, with wide mouths and slant eyes. In fact, degraded and repulsive versions of the, to the Europeans, least lovely Mongol types. Now, from my perspective, having read his other letters and accounts of his belief, in combination with his explicit mention that this is a European as opposed to an objective perspective used merely to explain his description, it does not hold as much weight for me as it does to others. That the man was not politically correct, having been born in 1892, is a no-brainer, but the extent of prejudiced beliefs are something nuanced to discuss, and not the product of a single quote. This holds true also for the popular interpretation that Middle-earth's dwarves have any purposeful connection to Jewish stereotypes. Once you read letters 30, 176, and watch his 1964 interview with the BBC, you'll understand that any connection with Judaism, for example, was strictly cultural and linguistic, and also combined with other peoples too, such as the Norse. At any rate, they were not an allegory or outright representation, which we know he creatively disliked, also through his own letters. Either way, the point I'm trying to make is that his letters form, in their totality, a much fuller picture than what a single paragraph someone may cite on YouTube, and their context is vital for you to build an educated picture for yourself according to your own opinions. This, while also keeping in mind that there still exist a number of letters not included, as well as some whose parts are missing. At the same time, it is also important to remember that these letters were written in the span of many decades, which can sometimes lead to contradictory information being provided by Tolkien. For example, there are conflicting accounts on how Tolkien came up with the dwarves' spelling, which is technically wrong. It has been claimed that he wanted something more different and ancient from the beginning, but also that he made a mistake and decided to roll with it, something he may have later regretted. As you can imagine, these are things he answered in the 1930s, but also in the 1960s, and within 30 years a man may forget, get confused, or misremember something. In these cases, the oldest source is usually better, but the specific context is important. This brings me to another useful resource, which is the official biography of J.R.R. Tolkien by Humphrey Carpenter, who knew Tolkien personally. In this biography, we get a good picture of Tolkien's life, and especially his youth, although this too makes a number of omissions about his life and experiences. Nonetheless, if you combine the biography with the letters, you can gain a decent understanding of Tolkien's thought process and views, while recognizing that authorized material may also be subjected to purposeful inaccuracy or omission. In my opinion, one of the best ways to really understand his views on things like storytelling, myths, and fairy tales are the numerous lectures of his that have since been published. On Fairy Stories serves as perhaps one of the best ways to look behind the curtain, as it were, and really see his perspective on writing and popular culture. And something which supplements this are the primary accounts of people like his son Christopher, who was both very close to his father and to the creative process of The Lord of the Rings. The amount of material that he edited and published, in combination with public interviews that he gave on the subject of his father, provide an invaluable resource toward understanding J.R.R. Tolkien himself and his creative ideas and concerns. The same goes to the accounts of his friends and acquaintances, such as C.S. Lewis, but also some of his former students, if you'd like to get the full picture on something like his teaching ability. For example, on my video on the subject, there were a lot of conflicting accounts on how good a professor Tolkien truly was. These accounts must then be understood in the proper context of their time period, Tolkien's life events, as well as time difference between each other, in order to uncover the full picture. Not to mention the personal experience of the one who actually said it. Ultimately, the main thing to take away from this video is that there are a lot of sources out there that exist with their proper context. When doing the research, you will likely find multiple sides of the same thing, and this is natural for any human being, considering how complex we all are. But always keep in mind that behind any source, there are historical events and external factors that contributed to its existence. And it is sometimes up to you to see through the fog and the simplified views sometimes found online. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.